to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 46. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
but that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
Today we are talking to Tommy. Tommy is a contractor for Microsoft who lives in the Seattle area and a huge travel lover. Hence, he is a guest on our podcast. Welcome, Tommy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You have been to a lot of countries? Like a lot of countries.
Yeah, I've been pretty fortunate here in the last couple of years, being able to kind of study abroad in a few different countries and doing a bit of traveling off of that. So, been pretty lucky.
When you say a few different countries, I think you need to give some more specific numbers here to give people an idea how few a few is.
Over the last 2 years, I've been to about 17 countries. I was living in Costa Rica for about 5 months while I finished my associate's degree in Spanish. And then for my last semester of college, I studied in Bilbao, Spain, where I was for about another 5 months. And that's where I kind of finished up my schooling and did about 8 countries while I was over there, maybe 9. And yeah, it was a great adventure and excited to kind of share the story.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Talk about making the most of your opportunities. Way to go, Tommy.
Seriously, that's so cool. Wow. So I'm a big Spain fan. So before we go any further, favorite city in Spain?
You know, the funny thing is, my goal was to try to do a different country every weekend. Mm-hmm. And with doing that, I actually wasn't able to travel too much outside of Bilbao where I was living. And
really?
So, yeah. And so I made it to one city. I went down and visited a friend, and I believe it was Sevilla. And I loved
cool.
it. It was beautiful. But I love Bilbao. They're right there on the water. It's one of the bigger business districts in Spain. And so
now is that on the northern part of Spain? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, so it's about an hour and a half south of the French border.
Okay.
And so that is kind of the Basque country. And so still a part of Spain, but they have a very different culture than the rest of the country and just incredible food. And in town they have the Guggenheim Museum, one of 3, I believe. The others being in New York and in Venice, Italy.
I love it. I have not made my way to Bilbao, but I was close to there in Mutriku last fall, and then went over to San Sebastian. But was considering going to Bilbao, and I kind of had to weigh my options. And I was like, but the Guggenheim, it looks so cool.
It is beautiful, and they have some amazing paintings in there. But,
that's so cool.
San Sebastian is just a beautiful place too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because once you start trying to decide where you're going to go when you're over, traveling, it's like, well, all of the options are great. So.
It's impossible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Tommy. So we've got a couple of questions that we like to ask all our guests just to give us a good overview, and then we'll dive into your travel story.
Perfect.
So first of all, why do you travel?
Why do I travel? It's a tough question. I mean, there's just so much to see out there. I mean, with my first study abroad experience, I hadn't experienced too much internationally. I mean, I'd been to Mexico one time with my family when I was younger, but I didn't really have that international understanding as of yet. And so when I went down to Costa Rica, I mean, it really just opened my eyes. I was living with an abuelita, our little grandma, and she was amazing. I lived there with one of my good buddies who I went to school with at my first college, Boise State. And just the way life works outside of the U.S., it's hard to understand until you really go there and experience it yourself. And so through that first kind of study abroad experience, I was able to recognize that, and I just fell in love with learning about these new cultures and just talking to the people and learning about the way their lives operate, and just kind of develop a better understanding of what's going on, and just then outside of where we live here.
Good answer.
Yeah.
We approve. Not like there's really a wrong answer, but it's still a good answer. Okay, so second question. What type of traveler are you?
So I am a last-minute traveler. I do not plan for anything. And
that does not surprise me.
Even to the point where I was flying into Belgium one weekend, and I got in around like midnight or 12:30. I didn't book any hostel or hotel, and I mean, I figured I would just figure it out when I get there. So I hop on the wrong train to start off with. That was nice. And then I hop on a bus, go back in town, and end up sleeping in this train station for a couple hours until I got kicked out by the train security, and ended up having to go find a hotel at around 3 a.m.
Wow.
So that is the level of preparedness that I bring to the table. But with that being said, I do the research as for the important vaccinations, currency, all the important stuff for getting into the country and getting out safely. But it's the in-betweens that kind of play by ear.
Oh my goodness. I need to provide our listeners with a little more background and share that Tommy used to be one of Ryan's students. So Ryan, when you hear, or sorry, Mr. Palmer, when you hear that Tommy's a last-minute traveler and you were not surprised, is this because of like assignments that came in last minute, or
No, I don't. I honestly don't remember. I don't remember when you turned stuff in.
I was always turning it in way before it was due, filled out in their entirety. That's a joke.
Yeah, that's not what I remember either. But no, just as far as personality wise, that fits for what I know of Tommy. We were talking a little bit before we started recording, so we're pretty sure it was both 8th grade and 9th grade, right, Tommy?
Yeah, so I believe I first had you in 8th grade, and then 9th grade, maybe material science was the class, and then physical science. And then one more time, senior year for astronomy.
Yeah. So I've known Tommy for a fair amount of time.
Yes.
So it's given me 3 years of having him as a student, but then that's more than 3 years of his life.
Yeah.
Right? For 5-6 years of your life, just like
so
at school at
now.
least when it was. No. I mean, not up to now, but I mean, just like of those schooling years was 6 of those years, right? So and then plus however many years after that. So it's So that's what
we've known each other
say.
for a
It doesn't
while.
surprise me.
Wow. Okay. Well, you stress us out, but we're excited to hear your stories.
Thank you.
I mean, it doesn't stress me out as long as I'm not the one who's being last minute. Because the other thing though about Tommy is everything always seems to work out for him somehow.
There's always a plan in the back of the head. Sometimes the middle is just a little gray.
Okay, so getting kicked out of the train station at 3:00. I want to hear about the plan that was in the back of the head.
Oh, the plan in the back of the head was I took the bus and I knew I had to walk like a mile and a half or so into the middle of town. I just assumed that there'd be a few hostel options. And so as I'm walking around the middle of Central Plaza in Brussels, just kind of looking around, trying to find some Wi-Fi. Can't really find much. It's like, all right, I got a sleeping bag. I have my hammock, and let's go into the train station. Try to close my eyes for a little bit. And the security guard didn't like that too much. So then I found my hostel and ended up meeting some just incredible travelers at that hostel. But we can get to that in a little bit.
Okay, so I got one final intro question, and then we can get into your travel stories. What is your number one travel tip, Tommy?
I'd have to say my number one travel tip would to just soak in every experience while you're there. I mean, whether that just be people watching or the architecture of the buildings around you, even just looking at the trash. What are people eating? I mean, just the tiny little things that you can't read on TripAdvisor or Yelp. They're the things that you'll genuinely remember now as you're talking on a podcast to your 8th grade science teacher. Yeah, just really take in the environment around you and be open to new experiences and new ideas. I mean, it's hard to, yeah.
Good tip.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what trip are you going to be telling us about today, Tommy?
So today, I believe I was going to talk about my study abroad experience in Spain. And with that one, I actually started off in Israel.
As you normally would on your way to Spain. It's definitely on the way.
Of course. Just a couple countries to the right.
So why did you start out in Israel?
So right before I left, I went and visited my cousin in Chicago. And so I was looking for just the cheapest ticket out of Chicago to go on the other side of the water. And Israel was the least expensive ticket. So
really?
That's what I chose. Yeah.
Like a direct flight from Chicago to what? Jerusalem, Tel Aviv?
So it was a one stop. I flew from Chicago airport to Rome. I was in Rome for about maybe an hour and a half. And then from there I transferred to Ben Gurion. I'm going to butcher a lot of these pronunciations, so be prepared.
It's okay. We do it all the time.
So Ben Gurion Airport is the international airport in Tel Aviv, and so that's where I flew.
Okay. So how long were you there then?
I was there for, I believe it was 11 days. And so...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was in Jordan, which we'll get to in a second, for about 5 days of that. And then the remaining 6 days, I was kind of bouncing around between Eilat, which is the southernmost city in Israel, and Tel Aviv, which is kind of like north-central, right there on the coast. And yeah, so I kind of started off my adventure at the airport and headed in town. Got in town around 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's just beautiful there. I mean, when you come in and it's a bit desolate before you get into downtown Tel Aviv. And so it's just a lot of kind of open sand and kind of just a few buildings here and there. And then once you get into downtown Tel Aviv, that's when you kind of start to see kind of the high rises and kind of bigger buildings. And then once you push through kind of the more outskirt Tel Aviv, that's when you get to the ocean. And it's just beautiful. And I didn't expect this going there, but there are about 7 beaches along the city border of Tel Aviv. And yeah, and so it's just nonstop beaches. And then there's a long walkway that goes along all these beaches, and you can take that into this really interesting city called Old Haifa. And Old Haifa, it is, let's see, I have my note here. So it was a really important city with this beautiful cobblestone walkway and just old churches right on a peninsula overlooking, I forget which sea is right there off of Israel. I want to say it's the Mediterranean, but I believe...
Yes, that'd be the Mediterranean.
Yeah, so Mediterranean, and just beautiful colors, purple rooftops, and it was one of my favorite little excursions out of Tel Aviv. Yeah, and so I would do that for a little bit, and then... So that was kind of my first day, just a little exploration of the city. And so then day 2 is kind of where my kind of big adventure started. And so I decided a few weeks back that I wanted to go to Jordan, and because of Petra. And so,
that is definitely on my list.
Yeah. And so a few weeks before the trip, I kind of figured that out, and so I went about just kind of figuring it out. And so we started off on day 2 at around 4 a.m. We drove from Tel Aviv to the Beit Shan border crossing. It probably is not pronounced right, but it's the northernmost border crossing between Israel and Jordan. And so when you get there, it was closed temporarily while we were there, so we had to wait about an hour and a half. But they have about 3 different checkpoints that you go through. So the first is you go through the Israeli border crossing, and that takes about a half hour, depending on how busy it is. And then you hop on a bus with 100 other very crammed people with a lot of luggage, and they bus you to the second building, and that's where you kind of go through some of the export documentation out of Israel and cross into Jordan. And then from that second building, they take you to the third, and that's where you get your Jordanian stamp, and you enter the country officially. And so that whole process took about 2.5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was pretty interesting to just kind of go through that process, especially this was my first time crossing into a country where I hadn't exactly spoken the language. Before that, I did a lot of my traveling through Central America, and I speak enough Spanish to be able to get by. Not totally fluent in any way, but enough to be able to travel about. But going into Jordan and even Israel with the national language in Jordan, I believe it's Arabic. It was very different, and so you can't understand a word that's being said around you, and so you just kind of have to trust that everything's going to kind of turn out all right.
Wow.
Yeah, so kind of went through that last building and hopped back on the bus with my tour group. So I probably should have mentioned I was going with a tour group of about 9 people, so myself and 8 others, and just great people, and just an incredible experience. I mean, traveled with a family from Italy and a family from Vietnam, and then I also met someone who lived 10 minutes away from me here in Bellevue, Washington. And so,
really,
wow,
and it just shows how big this world is, but how small it is. And so it was a really interesting experience to be able to do that with all of them. And so, yeah, so right after that border, kind of got my first taste of Jordan. We are driving towards Jerash. And so Jerash, Jordan is home to a pretty interesting archaeological park. And so in between the border and there, you just kind of see rural Jordan, which is just kind of, it's not a city in any way. It's more just buildings along the roadside, small markets, small homes, and goat markets. Thought that was something interesting that I had never seen before.
Did you say goat markets?
I don't know if I could call it a goat market, but people selling goats on the side of the road.
Like live goats?
Yes. So live goats for eating. Yeah, and so you'd kind of see that. Okay. Yeah. And so that was a big thing that we ate throughout Jordan was goat. And that's not.
And how was it?
You know, it was interesting. They made it in a number of ways. And so we never really just had goat on its own. It was normally came in kind of not a stew form, but a little bit like a stew with some rice and hummus was a big one, and pita bread. And so I ate quite a bit of hummus and pita bread for breakfast, I think every day when I was in Jordan. So that was fun for my stomach to adjust to. Yeah, so
one of the joys of travel.
Saw those kind of goats on the side of the road, saw the interesting buildings and just kind of the way that real landscape was laid out. And then we got into Jerash. And Jerash was, kind of like I mentioned, that archaeological ruins with just this incredible view of the sandstone city, which was behind it. And I want to say Jerash is one of the larger cities in Jordan. It might be the largest, but I'm not positive. But it is just a beautiful city, a bunch of people, and on the outskirts, about half a mile is where this archaeological park is. Kind of up on the hillside a little bit. And I mean, it was just this beautiful, beautiful architecture with a big theater that is still standing. And I believe it was a Roman settlement. It was a pretty modern city just outside of Jerash at its time. And still today, I mean, there is quite a bit of ruin left. Like just that big theater. They have a beautiful walkway with just hundreds of columns walking on your right. I'd say about 100 feet in the air. And it's just, that was kind of my first taste of Jordan. And it was an incredible way to start off and see that.
Wow. I'm looking at pictures online. That looks, crazy.
Yeah.
It is.
It was just beautiful.
It's like these huge columns and there's tons of them. And you just got to like walk past them. There's not like a guided thing that you have to be in this place or you can't be in that place or anything like that.
No. So there's a few individuals who work there who are the unofficial tour guides of the ruins who will kind of take you to some parts where a tourist normally wouldn't go. But for the most part, it's pretty wide open. In the theater, I believe what they said, it was every day they have like this live band playing. When I was there, it was bagpipes. So it was like a Scottish feel in these ancient ruins.
Okay. Interesting combination.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at the I'm looking at the theater right now. So it's like a sort of an outdoor amphitheater type of a thing. Was it acoustically fancy so that like you could hear super well?
Yeah, it played beautifully. I kind of went up to the top steps, about 50 steps up, and you could just kind of sit there and you could hear the acoustics bouncing off. It's about a half dome what the theater is, and you could hear it kind of bounce off the different terrain around it and just kind of created this beautiful sound. It was very interesting.
That's
experience.
Super cool.
That's really cool. That's so unique.
Yeah. And from there, let's see, we went to a few different kind of smaller cities to just kind of get out and walk around. Went to Wadi Musa and Mount Nebo. So Mount Nebo is
I feel like
pretty
I've heard
interesting.
of Mount Nebo before.
So it's biblical. And so...
Probably why I've heard of it then.
Yeah. And so Mount Nebo was, according to the Bible, the place where Moses was granted the view of the Promised Land. And according to modern religion, I believe it's also where Moses is buried.
Okay.
So when I was, and a kind of interesting part about this Israel-Jordan trip for me was, I mean, I've never been too much into religion myself, but I've always been fascinated with how it influences kind of the environment around us. And so with going to Israel and Jordan being two very religious countries, and it was a way to kind of learn about the culture at the foundation and learn about how it influences a country on kind of that larger scale. And so that was a very interesting thing to see in Jordan. And going into, there's one building at the very top, and that's where supposedly Moses is buried. And it's this marble, it's like a beautiful marble sandstone on the bottom with just carvings and different designs. Mosaic is the word I'm looking for. So it's floor to ceiling mosaic with just different graphics and very well kept, very clean. And it was just very interesting to see. And so there were only about 5 people when we got up there. And so it is a bit off the beaten path, but it gives you a view of just the whole valley below you, just this big, big desolate land. And it's a breathtaking view.
So what was the weather like while you were there? Like you were talking about the amazing view, so I'm assuming it wasn't like cloudy and rainy.
No. So when I was there, slightly overcast, not too bad, but it
Okay.
was warm. So the entire time I was in Jordan, during the day, it ranged from about 105 degrees to about 112.
Oh
Yeah.
Ryan,
And
you want to
so the big,
no. Gross.
yeah, very warm. And we did so much walking with that heat. I ended up losing 10 pounds over those 12 days.
Wow.
Seriously. Wow.
Yeah. So I'll get to kind of how much I was walking here in a second, but yeah, we were just walking everywhere. And so when it's that warm and all you're doing is drinking water, you're eating very healthy for the most part, just with very, very low preservatives, if any preservatives in your food. And kind of like I was mentioning with just eating vegetables or peppers with hummus and pita, it's kind of that high calorie diet where you're just kind of burning off a lot of that fat if you're doing a lot of the walking in that high heat. And so it just kind of kept you energized enough and kept me going.
Wow.
So it was pretty warm there. And then let's see, from Mount Nebu, that is when we kind of went to the hotel where we stayed at before we went to Petra. And so we head from Mount Nebu, get to our hotel. And it's funny, I'm reading through my travel journal right now, and I made sure to write the 6th floor was the first floor. And now thinking back to it, we couldn't figure out the elevators at first because we get to the hotel and it's kind of on a hillside. And so the top floor of it was the 6th floor, and you would go down to the bottom, and everything was just kind of backwards in the hotel. The lights didn't work in the bathroom or in our hotel room. Half windows.
Like they didn't work at all, or you just couldn't figure out how to make them work?
Oh, it very well could have been I couldn't figure out how to make it work, but for my sake, I'm going to say they didn't work.
Okay.
But yeah, so we were there and we stayed there for 2 total nights. So now we're going into kind of the second day in Jordan, and we arrived at Petra at around 8 a.m. And so when you arrive at Petra, you arrive at the visiting center, which is about, I'd say about 1.5 miles away from where kind of this UNESCO site is. And so there is where you get your 2-day pass. You have to present your passport. And they just kind of go.
Wait, what's this 2-day pass?
So you can either go for a 1-day pass or a 2-day pass. And we were going for multiple days. So we went and got that 2-day pass. And you have to present your passport. And yeah, I believe the park entrance. So it was included in my travel fee. But I believe it was around like $60 for a day.
Okay.
And so that gave you access to go in. And so you would get that there. And there were a couple food vendors and just a little music playing. And that's where you kind of begin to walk. And so after that visitor center, it takes about half hour to walk to the Sick. And what the Sick is, it's kind of the entrance into Petra. So when you're walking along the path to get there, it's kind of rolling hills a little bit, but there's also some old ruins, you could say, carved into the sandstone. And about halfway in between the visitor center and where the entrance is, the Sick, it's when the sandstone walls start to kind of climb. And so you're pretty much walking through a passageway in between 2 sandstone walls. And so
it's kind of like a canyon?
Yeah, it's like a canyon. And there's just a bunch of people walking back and forth to try to get to the site. There's these old horses that are pulling like 2-person buggies behind them for people who wanted to pay for that or who couldn't walk. And you didn't see any camels yet, but it was just primarily horse and I'm sorry, not horse, donkey. And so they had donkeys. And so you finally keep walking, and you hit the stick. And it goes from just a shaded area into just a beautiful building called the Treasury, which is the first thing you see with light shining right out front of it. I mean, it was a breathtaking moment. For any of the listeners who don't know what Petra is, just give it a Google, and it's a beautiful building, the Treasury.
So is the Treasury the one in Indiana Jones?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't want to Google it, throw on some Indiana Jones and it'll do just about the same. And
okay.
So cool.
And it's just an incredible sight to see at first. I mean, I remember just kind of taking a step back and getting some goosebumps, and it was just, it's just thousands of years old, just staring at you in the face and being able to stand just all of our modern history, and it's still standing there. It was an incredible experience. And so right when you kind of walk in, to your left, your immediate left, you'll see kind of like a souvenir shop, but with more authentic goods.
Okay, so you walk into this big giant facade's not the right word, but like carved into the side of the canyon thing that's in Indiana Jones, and you walk in and there's a souvenir shop?
Yes.
Like you
selling Coca-Cola and
Oh,
well,
man.
I mean, if it's as hot as it is there, I guess that makes sense.
It's kind of funny how much like soda they did drink, but yeah, I mean, it's not really a souvenir shop at all. I mean, it's just a hut with different handmade artifacts from within Petra, and a few not so handmade, more kind of brought in for the tourists. But you could buy water there. The big thing in Jordan was I was spending about $25 a day just on water.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you can't drink any water out of any faucets. So you're kind of just stuck buying bottled water, and especially with that heat and you're sweating a lot, it's one of the more important things you have to be doing.
Yep. That sounds very wise.
Yeah. So, kind of look there at the left, and when you walking on the left, there's a little bit area past the souvenir stand where some kids would hang out, and these kids would take you up to an interesting view spot where you could get a cool Instagram picture, which is what they were all trying to sell us.
Wait. What do you mean they're trying to sell you an Instagram picture?
So, as a tourist, it's very obvious that you're a tourist, and there's certain areas where you can't go. It's just kind of for the locals, the Bedouins. So, just back a little history on Petra. The original people who were living there were the Bedouin people, and so I don't know how ever many years ago that they left or under what circumstance, but there are still descendants of the Bedouins living in Petra. And so there are children, teens, and kind of young adults and older generation who do live inside of there. And so some of those kids, how they make their money is they kind of get to take tourists to unique spots to take pictures or to provide a unique experience.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it was very interesting. I just kind of sat there one day and watched these kids and how they worked and kind of the networking that they had. How every native to Petra knew one another, and the way they communicated and networked in terms of like business operation like that was very interesting to see. And it was a very connected community, which I thought was kind of unique.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so we kind of walk in there, and we were checking out the treasury for a while, and then you walk to your right. And when you walk to your right, it's about 30-foot wide path. You walk through that in between two sandstone structures, and the view kind of opens up. And when it opens up, you see it was the theater on the left, and the theater was this big kind of upside down dome, about 3/4 full. And so if that makes any sense, with just kind of all open seating facing to where the stage would have been in the middle and facing the big walkway. And so you see that, and it's just beautiful. And back behind that on the hillside, they have tombs. And so what the tombs kind of looked like is if you could carve out a little cave in the side of the sandstone and give it just kind of a nice looking face on the front, there were hundreds of them spread throughout this hillside. And that is supposedly where the burials would take place.
Interesting. Was it an amphitheater? Is
Yeah,
that what you're describing? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's so weird because when I first look at pictures of Petra, all I see are like just that entrance, that facade like Ryan was talking about. But it sounds like there's a lot that's in there as well then.
Yeah, and that's something that really caught me off guard when I got there. I mean, I just went there because of the picture of what we saw in Indiana Jones, the treasury.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you get in there and you realize that it extends about 6 miles, or not 6 miles, I'd say about 3 miles of total area of just walking. There's
with other like carved areas and buildings and things in the sides of hills.
Yeah, so you have the amphitheater on your left, and then on your right hand side there's another kind of hillside of sandstone, and in that you have, it looks similar to the treasury, but it's another burial site to my best belief. And it's a little bit higher up on the hill. You have to walk up, I'd say about 100 feet in elevation. And you get up there, and it's a big open burial temple, and you can walk around there, and it wasn't too much. But then once you pass those two, that's when we kind of went towards the monastery. And so the monastery was one of the most interesting aspects to it, because it was a building I hadn't seen before. But it was almost...
Is it currently a monastery, or it's like it used to be a monastery?
It used to be. So if you look at it, if you like Google it and look at a picture of it, it looks similar to the treasury, but when you get there standing in front of it, it's actually much larger. And
oh, really?
Yeah. And so
interesting.
You end up walking from the Sick, which is the entrance to the park, about 3.5 to 4 miles in this 110 degree heat.
Ugh.
And you have to climb pretty good elevation. I'd say there's actually probably a couple thousand steps that you have to go up.
Really?
Yeah. So you arrive to kind of the base of this mountain, not mountain, but little sandstone mountain. And you take all these steps, which take about 40 minutes to get up to. And when you get to the top, you walk out and you turn to your right a little bit once you get around the corner. And that's where this monastery just kind of pops out at you.
Wow.
And so it was just this beautiful structure, and you can walk back kind of farther away from the face of it, and you can climb up onto the top of this little mountain. And that gives you a full panoramic view of the monastery, the amphitheater down below, what you can see like through the sandstone cracks. And then if you look back behind you, you'll see a complete open valley of just a little bit of nothing. And it's very interesting to see. It was incredible.
Wow. That's so interesting. That just sounds like something that's out of this world, or like, I don't know, from a video game, or you know what I mean, as far as just like how different it is from the lives that we know and everything. Was it just so surreal for you?
It was. I mean, especially just growing up here in Kirkland, Washington, it's a very different environment than everything. I mean, just every single aspect of life was different. There was not a single the aspect of the importance of family and friends was extremely prevalent there. But yeah, I mean, just so many differences between the two cultures and just the way society operates. It was very enlightening to see.
Wow.
So you had 2 days in Petra. And so was it mostly just hiking around and looking at all of the different sites?
Yeah, so it was just walking. This day, so our first day here, I actually walked 27 miles.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So it was a lot. You
were like walking in like through these canyons like farther and farther away, and then do you stay in Petra overnight?
No, so there's a small town, I can't remember the name of it, that is about a mile outside of Petra, and that's where most travelers will stay who are going in and are looking to go the next day. And then the hotel we stayed at, the Allenbot, the Allenbot Hotel, was about 4 or 5 miles away from maybe farther than that, about 10 miles away from the entrance to Petra. And so what kicked us in over here, we ended up walking back to our hotel that day. And so that was a fun little last stretch.
Well, yeah, like so that's what I'm wondering is you do all this walking and then you have to turn around and walk back, but then you go a second day and you have to re-walk the same places you already walked?
When you get there, you could do the walk 30 times and still be interested.
Sure, but it's just like a lot of walking.
It is. It is definitely a lot of walking, especially if you want to see all the different monuments throughout the site. But it's worth it. I mean, it's worth it on the train to be able to do that, so you can experience it fully.
So were you able to see all of Petra?
Yeah.
Or in the 2 days you were able to see it all?
Cool.
Yeah, and so you could just see it in one day, but with us knowing that we had a second day, we did about 3/4 of it the first day, and that rest 25% the next. But and so we kind of ended up our day at the monastery and ended up walking back towards our hotel, and we had a really cool experience that night. So Petra offers an activity called Petra at Night. And so what that is you walk from the visitor center to the Sick, in the Sixth, where that entrance to everything is, right where the treasury is. And it had to have been around 10 o'clock at night, 10 million stars out above you. And you're walking through the Sick, and how I mentioned the sandstone comes up when you're walking through to get to the treasury. They line it with candles the whole way. You walk in, and when you open up to the treasury, they line the inner boundary of where the treasury is with candles, and they put down, it was probably about 100 mats. And so each person has their own mat, and there's about, say, 10 rows. So 10 rows of 20, so about 200 people there, of individual mats with a candle in front of each mat. And they are playing authentic Jordanian music, and they are bringing you this tea that we all drank. And it was just an incredible thing to see. And you look up while they're playing this music, and you see kind of this dark shadow of the treasury, and you look up, and there's just a million stars above you.
Oh,
wow.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So that went on for about a half hour, and then after 30 minutes, the music starts ramping up, and all of a sudden these lights flash on the treasury, and it just gives you a lit up view, a night view of the treasury. And so we went through that. That all took about 2 hours, and then walked back to our hotel, and and that was kind of the end of that day.
That's super cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a great way to end it off. And then that next day we went back in and explored kind of the rest of that 25%. Got kind of a late start and went in around 11 in the morning, and just kind of went in and walked around and explored a lot of the same sites we went to before, but kind of really walked around and kind of tried to see as much as we can.
So you were with the rest of your group that whole time? Like you said, there were 9 of you?
Yeah, so I traveled with 3 people from Norway, and like kind of my friends within the group were 3 individuals from Norway, and then 1 who lives in the Hamptons. He grew up there and was But
so it was people that you met through this group, though. Like you didn't know them. Okay.
Yeah, so they were all within my group. And so we all kind of walked around and saw all this. And so then we packed up, left Petra that second day, and we headed towards Wadi Rum. And so Wadi Rum is
still in Jordan.
Still in Jordan. So it's about, I can't remember, maybe 2 hours outside of Petra. And it's where they shot The Martian. Yeah, so very similar to a Marzi landscape out in the middle of the desert. We went there and we ended up staying in the, I might mispronounce another name, the Bet Ali Lodge. And what that is, it was a Bedouin camp in the middle of Wadi Rum. And so you're kind of staying out in the middle of this big desert with just sand everywhere around you. And then there's 20 tents up in the middle. And so we stayed there for a night and went out, tried to look at some stars that night, but I remember it almost being a full moon, so you couldn't see too much. But yeah, I mean, they were just playing just incredible music, and we were there with about, I would say, 30 travelers, and then about 50 native Jordanians. And they were there for some celebration. It may have been some holiday, I don't know which, but there was just music going on, dancing, and it was just one of those experiences that's just hard to explain, where you just feel so enriched in another culture. It was a very lucky experience to have, to be there. Yeah, so we did that for the night, and then the next day is when we went out and we kind of explored Wadi Rum. And so we took out this...
AKA Mars.
Yes. So we went out on Mars, and it's pretty impressive. We didn't need any oxygen tanks, so I was pretty proud. But we go out in this truck, and this kid who was driving our truck couldn't have been older than 13 years old.
Oh.
So he's out there with 3 of his friends. Each friend has their own truck. And we're just cruising through Mars with just these big old landscapes and just big sandstone mountains, if you can call them. But they're not exactly mountains. It's more topped off at the top. So less of a point, and it just kind of flattens out. But just huge structures. And they took us to this point in the sand where there was a perfect division between the light colored sand and the like darker orange colored sand. And it just went on for about a mile, and it was very interesting to see.
Just like a line?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, not a perfect line, but it just followed this separation of colors. And it was...
Did they explain why?
Yes, but I didn't write it in my journal, so my brain can't remember.
You need to tell your science teacher the reason. This is very important.
I'll come back next time and tell you.
Well, so I am curious, though, since you brought up the sand. So obviously The Martian takes place on Mars. You said it was shot there in Wadi Rum. But oftentimes in film, they do a lot of color correction and kind of change, the tint or, the colors that things can look like on film compared to what it actually looks like in person. So how similar did it look like being there to what you see in the movie The Martian?
Very similar. I mean, in the movies, I believe the colors darken a little bit, just maybe for the way the movie was filmed.
Sure.
But the colors are very vibrant when you get there. And,
Okay.
Very dry air. I mean, with it, I mean, when we were here, I think it was 118 degrees actually. So that was hot.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I had my headscarf on the whole time. I wore Tevas. So that was probably not the best decision on my part.
Did you burn your feet?
Yeah, that sand was hot.
Wow.
So I was dancing around the sand for a while. But yeah, I mean, we just went out and did that. And I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Lawrence of Arabia.
Like the old school one?
Yeah, it's an old school film that was kind of based out of that same area. And they have a little tent set up there. It was a tent that was used in the film, and it's kind of made it for all these years. And there's one gentleman who lives there. And so we went with our guide and sat down and had some tea with this gentleman. And there we just kind of talked about, this was our whole group at this point, so about 9 of us. And there we just talked about just different life stories. And of the people we were traveling with, there was one woman, or 2 individuals I was traveling with had just incredible life stories. And we talked about them under this tent and while we were just sipping tea. And it just really puts into perspective with our lives here and the journeys that we take, and how that there's just people who are experiencing just life in ways that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And so that was one thing that really stuck out to me about just being there at that camp. Those are the stories, kind of what I was referencing at the beginning, that when you learn, it just really expands the way you can look at this world and the way you can look at travel. And the things that you can learn in traveling just go so far beyond what you can see and what you eat. It's just a lot of these friendships and relationships that you build while traveling. It was a great experience. And yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that experience with us. I think we're going to have you back on to share more of your stories another time, because clearly you have so many more experiences to share. Oh, my goodness.
We didn't even make it to Spain. That was where you were going, right?
We didn't make it to Spain at all.
Well, we'll have to do that next time.
We will, absolutely. So we have a couple questions for you, kind of wrapping up this trip. So based on the title of our show, Take Me With You, if you could take us with you to just one thing on this trip that you just shared about, what would it be and why?
It would have to be going into Petra.
Thank you. We're excited.
It's that first look when you walk past the sick and you see the treasury just looking at you. It's incredible. Yeah.
Cool.
I wish everyone could experience it.
That's awesome. And what's your next trip?
My next trip, I don't know. The other week, so I just started with my job here a few weeks ago, and so I took a little trip to Tijuana about 3 weeks ago. I flew into San Diego and kind of crossed the border over there, and that was kind of my next one. But I would guess from there, I would have to say I'd love to go back to Africa. I've been doing a little bit of work and looking into Western Africa around Ghana, and Ghana is just a beautiful country with a lot to offer, I think, and a lot of opportunity to learn, and I think that might have to be my next one.
Very cool.
Wow, you are very ambitious in your travel goals.
I love it. Yeah. And do you have any travel questions for us?
So, I saw the way Mr. Palmer's forehead started to sweat when I was saying I was a last-minute traveler. So, what kind of traveler are you, Mr. Palmer?
Well, what would you predict based on what you know of me, Tommy?
So you got...
And by the way, you can call me Ryan now, right?
Whoa, this is the true graduation moment.
Oh, Ryan, I love it.
I mean, you don't have to. If it's uncomfortable, you don't have to. But you can.
Oh, it's Ryan from here on out. So I would say that the hotel's booked about a month in advance. Itinerary going about a month in advance. Yeah, that's what I got. About a month of preparation beforehand.
Earlier than that.
Mm-hmm.
2 months?
Nope, more.
Does that seem like a lot of time to you?
Oh, that seems like a lifetime.
So if I'm buying plane tickets, though, wait it just a month out, they're so much more expensive. So it has less to do with trying to be extra planned and more to do with trying to be cost effective. So there's like a sweet spot for buying your plane tickets. And so I'm trying to buy my tickets wherever that sweet spot is.
Where do you find that sweet spot to be?
It's a little... It's not 100% all the time. I actually, for my last trip to Ireland, so have you used Google Flights before?
Yeah, that's what I use for every flight I've ever booked.
There you go then. Yeah. You know how you can track flights?
Yeah.
So, and it'll track the prices. So I tracked the price of my flight to Ireland up until the day that I left. So even though I bought it, I kept it tracking so that I now have a graph that shows me how the price changed for like 4 months or something like that.
It's a good
strategy. See, thank you. And so generally it's like if you book it too far in advance, it's too expensive. And if you wait too late, it's too expensive. But there's kind of a sweet spot depending on who you ask and depending on the flight. Maybe 2 months, 3 months out, something like that. There's usually a sweet spot. I mean, it depends on where I'm going to and who I'm going with. Like if I was going with someone who knew where they were going, I wouldn't have an issue with somebody else planning everything as long as I felt like they were reliable.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
So you don't want to sleep in the train station with me next time?
Nope.
He sure doesn't.
No, I do not.
Will he invite you to share his hotel room that you didn't book? I'm not sure.
Probably not.
Depends on how nice you are to him and how much you shared your snacks with him. So.
And how many beds there are in the room.
Yeah.
If I have an extra bed, you would be welcome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Sweet.
Oh, well, that was great. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been amazing talking to both of you.
Yeah, well, we're not done quite yet. We're done with your story, but we still have one more segment, Tommy.
Awesome.
So we're going to end with the Wish You Were Here segment. So in this segment, each of the three of us is going to share a travel attraction from our travels. And since you've been to so many places, you've got lots of options there, Tommy. You can sort of think of it kind of like a postcard, you know, one of those old school postcards that would have a little snapshot of something and say, wish you were here. So that's kind of what was the inspiration for this segment. So just one thing from your travels that you've done that you think would be really cool that other people might like to know about. So Cheryl, what is your wish you were here for this week?
My wish you were here this week is from our state, Washington State.
Go Washington.
It is from a little town called Leavenworth, which we have very briefly talked about on this podcast, but people got to know about Leavenworth. It's a Bavarian-style town. It feels like you're at Disneyland, essentially, because they just go hard with the theme to the point that Starbucks and McDonald's got on board, and their font and their style even matches that Bavarian style, which is very fun. And it's in the mountains of Washington, which is just gorgeous as well. But the specific thing I want to share about from I Wish You Were Here is going there for Christmas time. I'm a big Christmas fan. And they do Christmas and they do it right. And so they even have a Christmas shop that's open year round, which is really fun. But at Christmas time, on the weekends leading up to it, and I think even maybe they sneak a little bit in the new year. I'm not quite sure. They do this big tree lighting party type of thing, like a tree lighting ceremony where they have carolers and music, and then they light up all the lights on the buildings and the trees and everything around you at once, and they really go all out with the lights as well. And it's very magical and it feels very Disneyland in that way. However, you get real snow there, not bubbles. And so it's super fun because it tends to get pretty snowy there that time of year. So I've gone twice. I went once with my family and we rented a big Airbnb house just across the river and stayed for the whole weekend. But then this last year I just went with my fiance and we just drove there for the day. And it was snowing all day. And then when we did the tree lighting, and it's just magical. Prepare for crowds because that's like, you know, the high season there and everything. Yeah. But it's so good. I love it. Do it.
Have you been up there for the tree lighting, Tommy?
I have. My brother lives in Kashmir, which is about 20 minutes out of Leavenworth.
Very cool.
It's beautiful up there. I love it.
So good. Yeah.
Awesome. Tommy, what are you going to do for your wish you were here?
For my wish I was here, thought about it. So I think I would say Isla Ometepe in Nicaragua. So
I know nothing about this. You're going to have to tell me.
I didn't know too much about it either until I went while I was going to school in Costa Rica. But Isla Ometepe is a island in the middle of Lake Nicaragua, which is the largest lake in Central America. Oh. And so you have to take a boat from mainland Nicaragua to the island itself and picture just a big... there are roads throughout everything, but just kind of picture like a big open farm a little bit where there are just chickens and pigs, horses, whatever animal you'll find on the island just kind of running around. And I went there for Thanksgiving about 2 years ago with just a group of my really good friends that we all met while going to school in Costa Rica. And we rented motorcycles for about 4 days. And this was the first time any of us but one of us had ridden a motorcycle before.
Oh boy.
So that was a very interesting process to learn.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah. We hop on the motorcycles and the gentleman went into us. So, do you know how to ride? We're like, no. It's like, okay, hop on the back. And so we hopped on the back with him. He took us to the back of this baseball field with horses in right field. There were people playing baseball on the field, and there were bulls in center right by us. He's like, all right. He showed us how to do the handles or kind of how to shift and do all of that. Taught us, went back. All right, see ya. Talk to you later. So, yep, we went out for about 4 days. Went out with my buddies. We stayed in this really, really interesting hostel. One of the more interesting ones I've stayed in. It was kind of buried in the jungle on this island. And so something I forgot to mention, both of these islands are volcanoes. So
always a plus in my book.
So there's about...
Did you or did you not see lava?
No lava.
Oh, bummer.
They are dormant.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, but you go to this hostel and it's in the middle of this jungle, and there's a little tree house that you can go up and have some morning coffee in. And so all my buddies and I our second morning there, grabbed some coffee, went up to this tree house that's above the tree canopy, and from there you can just see this full panoramic 360 view of these two mountains, this jungle surrounding you everywhere. And we just sat up there and talked for a couple hours and ate our peanut butter sandwiches and
authentic.
Yes, that is all the food we had. Yeah, the day before was we kind of got caught in a hurricane, and so all the food.
How do you kind of get caught in a hurricane?
Oh,
either you are in a hurricane or you're not in a hurricane.
Well, I'd call it more of a monsoon.
Okay.
More like a tropical hurricane. Well, it was hurricane. It was technically a hurricane. It was like Hurricane Nate or something like that.
Tommy, you're not in trouble or anything.
Well, I'm trying to figure... It was technically classified as a hurricane. I'm just doing this for my mom's sake. I don't want to scare her.
That's why you're doing it. Now I get it.
Yeah. So we were kind of trapped indoors for a little bit, and all the stores closed down for a day.
Wow.
And so that was actually on Thanksgiving. And so we ate cookies, peanut butter sandwiches, Lay's, and
like Lay's potato chips.
Lay's potato chips, and orange Fanta. So that was our Thanksgiving dinner.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving.
There you go.
Be grateful.
Wow.
Awesome.
Well, that's quite a unique place. Ryan, what about you?
So I'm going to do my Wish You Were Here from my recent trip to Ireland, because I have lots of things. This is in Dublin, and it's their Natural History Museum.
Cool.
Which I'm a big fan of natural history. I think I did another Wish You Were Here as a natural history museum.
Yes, you did.
In Frankfurt. But this one is especially intriguing, and what made me want to go there was because its nickname is the Dead Zoo.
Oh, boy.
Sounds very lively.
So it's basically 2 floors of taxidermy.
Huh.
Wow. Good
Yeah.
taxidermy?
No. I mean, some of it's
That's
okay.
the best kind.
I know, right?
That's the best kind.
But no, there's definitely some awkward, weird, not great taxidermy. And like, there's a few skeletons as well. But like, you work your way through, and I only got to do the entire bottom floor because I got to the second floor and I was up there for about 5 minutes, and they're like, okay, we're closing. Even though they weren't closing for 15 more minutes. We're like, oh no, we're closing the top floor, but the bottom floor is open for 15 more minutes. I was a little miffed. But because up on the second floor, they have an entire whale skeleton like hanging up above you. They had a human skeleton, which I thought was pretty cool. They had like full like bears that were taxidermied. They had a basking shark. That was one of the bad taxidermies. It just didn't look... It was like a sad big shark, but that was hanging up above too. And then they have these skeletons of the giant deer or whatever that I guess used to be there. And they're huge. They're like big old, they look more like moose skeletons, but apparently they're deer. So it's yeah. And Cheryl, if you enjoy bad taxidermy, there was some really good bad taxidermy in there. There was some decent taxidermy as well, but there was some like, no. So it was, I enjoyed it for the science, but then also for the humor, because there's just something about taxidermy. So there you go. That's my Wish You Were Here. The Dead Zoo in Dublin.
And for anyone else that enjoys bad taxidermy, you should check out badtaxidermy.com.
Oh.
It is a hoot.
I didn't know about
good.
that.
Oh, you don't? Oh, you got to check it out. It's pretty good and horrifying, both of those things. Yeah. Well, Tommy, thank you so much for being on our podcast. We loved having you.
Of course, thank you.
Do you have anything that you would like to plug?
If you like, feel free to check out I have a few travel photos on Firsthand Photos on Instagram. I don't have all my photos up there, but you'll see a good amount of Central America, and you'll be able to see the photos that we talked about here tonight from Jordan.
Cool. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're glad that you were on. If you would like to follow us on social media, either Tommy, you could do that, or our listeners, we are at Timwy Podcast. That's TMWY Podcast for Take Me With You on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. So we would love to have you follow us. Hopefully we can get some of those pictures, Tommy, that you mentioned this evening, and we can post those on our social media.
Sounds good.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com. Send us your crazy travel accommodation stories, maybe your guest suggestions, and more.
Yeah, you can also call us and leave us a voicemail with your travel story or tip or question that you would like us to answer. You can call us at 406-763-8699, or if it's easier to remember, that's 406-POD-TIMWE. We'd also really appreciate if you would rate and review us on whatever you're using to listen to this podcast. That just helps our podcast get known to more people. If you like our podcast and want to make sure you continue to hear all of our episodes, please go ahead and click subscribe so you can get updated and notified every time we post a new episode. And we would appreciate it if you would share about this episode on your social media so that more people can hear about the cool experience that Tommy had in Israel and Jordan.
As always, thanks to Beth Reed Miller for her artwork. You can check out more of her awesome artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can check out Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
All right, that is going to do it for this week's episode. Tommy, it was really fun having you on.
It was great catching up. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So until next time, please remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and a little love. Oh, the world is out there waiting to